Suetonius is famous because he mentions a certain Chrestus, spelled with an E. He does so via Tacitus. Now, is this Chrestos the same as Christos, so Christ? Or is it a different person? Now, this is a little bit of a debated instance. We have already, however, seen that in the sources we have an alternative spelling of either Christianos or Christianos. We already run into one of those. Therefore, it isn't a massive logical leap to think that if Christianos, Christians, can be spelled Christianos with an E, that perhaps Christos, spelled with an I, could also be spelled Chrestos with an E and still mean the same person. But of course, we need a bit more than that. For context, Suetonius speaks of events relating to Claudius' reign, so Emperor Claudius, and mythicists usually attack this from two angles. First, the different spelling angle, summarized as he said Chrestos, not Christos, so different person. This is very easily debunkable, as there are other references to this alternative spelling in the sources, a moot point. The second line of attack is that by saying instigator, he couldn't possibly mean Christ, since 1, he was not an instigator, he was a preacher, and 2, at the time of Claudius, Jesus certainly couldn't instigate anyone anymore. This is also incorrect, but it requires a bit more of a sophisticated analysis of Roman law. But let's do one thing at a time. So, is Chrestus an alternative spelling of Christos? Yes, it's very plausible. In Tertullian, Christiani is indeed used instead of Christiani, with an E, and he absolutely means Christians, no questions about that. Now, to be fair and give you all the sides and all the possible data, it is important to underline that the name Chrestos in Greek was rather common among slaves, kind of meant useful, serviceable. For example, one of Cicero's freedmen was named Chrestos, with an E. And this is one of the points the mythicists used to say that possibly could have been a reference to a slave uprising of Judaic slaves. Still, by using Occam's razor, we'll see that it's indeed much more probable that this does mean Christos, so Christ, and it's just an alternative spelling. You see, in his work, Life of the Roman Emperor Claudius, Suetonius mentions that Claudius expelled Jews from Rome, an event that most scholars date to the year 49 AD, and that Luke mentions in passing in his account about Paul in Corinth, Act 18:2. We read, open quotes, since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, in Latin impulsore Chresto, he, Claudius, expelled them from Rome. Close quotes. Now, once again, mythicists argue that Tacitus was referring to the followers of a Jewish zealot by the name of Chrestus, not the followers of Jesus Christ, and that the copyist responsible for the interpolation in Tacitus clumsily inserted the reference to Christus, ignoring the discrepancy between the forms Christus and Christianos. Thus, the interpretation of Tacitus' statement has become somewhat intertwined with the interpretation of Suetonius' statement. Now, the key to unraveling this is the fact that there are absolutely other examples of the use of the spellings Chrestos and Christianos in reference to Christ and Christians. For example, in a group of 9 tombstone epigraphs in North Phrygia, in modern-day Turkey, the Greek word for Christians is spelled Christianos, Kreistianos, and Kreistianos, the last of which corresponds precisely to Tacitus' spelling. In at least one of these inscriptions, the name is spelled in 2 different ways, Christianoi, Kreistianois. Moreover, the Codex Sinaiticus, a 4th century Christian edition of the Greek Bible, spells the word Christianos in 3 occurrences in the New Testament, Acts 11:26, 26:8, and 1 Peter 4:16. G.H.R. Horsley, in his important discussion of these inscriptions, points out, open quotes, the linguistic fact that there is a nearly complete overlapping of the sounds represented by the following symbols in Koine. Close quotes. And there are several studies that prove this point linguistically. The ease, which we have just documented and proven in the Roman world, by which the words Christianos in place of Christianos were used, both in spelling and most likely in spoken word, suggests that Suetonius would have done exactly the same thing, which we have proof for, when he spoke about Chrestos and connected into Christianos. On the contrary, and this is really the crux of the matter here, we have no evidence, independent of Suetonius' passage, that a alleged Jewish revolutionary by the name of Chrestus existed in the middle of the 1st century. And do note that whenever there is an actual uprising, a riot, a rebellion, the authorities do let us know and absolutely write it down, because they destroy them, they block them, and they want everyone to see that. If you're familiar with Roman sources, you know this. And the most important aspect of all this is the following. There is a lot more evidence of the existence of Christ, and yet mythicists deny that, but they are quick to accept as real the figure of this alleged Chrestus, the Jewish rebel, for which we only have one fragmentary mention. A massive double standard. If you question the validity of Jesus' historicity, then even more so should you question the validity of this supposed or alleged Jewish rebel Chrestus. But they don't, because it serves their purpose. A clear example of intellectual dishonesty. There is a very interesting point from Bart Denton Ehrman, who is now agnostic, so clearly not a Christian apologist. However, he still doesn't question the historicity of Jesus because of this. Open quotes. There are at least 15 different historical sources that attest to Christ's crucifixion within 100 years of his death, between 30 AD and 130 AD. In total, we have 42 sources dating to less than 150 years after Jesus' death that mention his existence, 9 of which are non-Christian. In comparison, regarding Julius Caesar or Julius Caesar, only 5 sources report his military operations. Close quotes. The Jesus mythicists would have us believe that Jesus Christ did not exist and that all these sources are just Christian propaganda, yet, as Miller correctly observes, open quotes, that there existed simultaneously Jewish zealots known as Christiani is to stretch coincidence rather far. Close quotes. Okay, let's debunk properly this